I'm going to explain the basic rules for HGV driving hours and Working Time Directive. Now, there are some other rules that you will need to know to pass your test, but these ones that I'm going to talk about in this video are the ones that we typically have to deal with on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. We can drive for a maximum of 9 hours per day. We can extend that time to 10 hours per day twice a week. Our weekly driving limit would be 56 hours a week in total. That's based on working 6 consecutive days, which is the maximum number of days we can work before we have to have our weekly rest, which I'll come to later on. There are also restrictions on how long we can drive for over a rolling 2-week period, and that is 90 hours in total. Meaning, if we did 56 driving hours in week 1, in week 2 we would be able to drive 34 hours, and then in week 3 the rolling total would include that 34, so we could drive for up to another 56. Typically, drivers will try and stick around 45 hours per week. We must take a break of 45 minutes for every 4.5 hours of driving that we do in a day. That can be split into 2 breaks, the first one being 15 minutes, the second one being 30 minutes. It cannot be the other way around, or of course we can have a full 45-minute break in one go. After we've had our 45-minute break, our 4.5 hour driving time resets. Each day we must take a minimum of 11 hours uninterrupted break within that 24-hour period. We can reduce this to 9 hours per day 3 times per week. That all depends on how many hours in a day that you've worked as to what break is counted towards which. Each week we must take an uninterrupted break of at least 45 hours. This is typically taken over the weekend, but not all job roles allow that. For example, supermarket deliveries, you may be working at the weekends and may have a Tuesday and a Wednesday as your allocated weekly rest period days off for that week. We can work for a maximum of 13 hours per day, meaning if we start at 6 AM, we must be finished all of our duties by 7 PM. We can extend to 15 hours per day 3 times per week, meaning if we start at 6 AM, we must be finished all our duties by 9 PM. All our driving time is recorded on the tachograph, and that not only records driving time, it also records speed, distance, as well as our brakes. The tachograph does also record other duties, meaning loading, unloading, cleaning and maintenance that we do within that day as well. In addition to driving hours, we also have the Working Time Directive, which we must follow as well. This means we can work for a maximum of 60 hours per week and an average of 48 hours per week over either a 17 or a 26-week period. That's dependent on what company you work for and the structure that they have in place. Working time does not include breaks and POA, periods of availability. In addition to our driving breaks, we must also take working time breaks. At 6 hours we must have had a 30-minute break, and at 9 hours we must have had a 45-minute break. Our driving time breaks, our 15 and 30 or full 45, do count towards our working time breaks. I mentioned earlier in the video about 9-hour breaks and 11-hour breaks. If you work a 13-hour day, you would typically use an 11-hour rest period, and if you work 15-hour days, you would use the 9-hour rest period. That's because the day consists of 24 hours. If you were to do a reduced rest, a 9-hour rest on a 13-hour day, you would have used one of your 9-hour reduced rests. That means you can't use one of those 15-hour days because you have used one of those 9-hour reduced rest periods. It's entirely up to you as the driver how you structure your breaks, providing they fit in with the rules and regulations that you must follow and of course your working day. They do sound confusing, but honestly they do make much more sense when you're using them on a day-to-day basis. If you do have any questions regarding HGV driving hours and working time, then leave them in the comments below. Hopefully you found this video helpful, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.